recorded and posted on our site. Okay. So welcome today's webinar. My name is Jessica Teggy. I am Restoration Program Manager for Ohio River Foundation, which is the nonprofit organization helping to coordinate the efforts of the Ohio River Valley CISMA, which are the two programs that helped make this webinar possible today. More on them later. But we are very fortunate to be joined today by Bob Bruner from Purdue University's Department of Entomology. Today's topic is a very important one, tree of heaven and spotted lanternfly, what you need to know. We will cover some tips and tricks for identifying the not so heavenly tree of heaven and the negative ecological impacts that this species has on our native environments and how they play a role in encouraging an equally horrible invasive pest called the spotted lanternfly. But before we get into it, let's give a little love to the organizations that made this happen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that on the screen. But ORV CISMA stands for Ohio River Valley Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. Basically, it's a coalition of organizations, agencies, businesses that are all working together to control invasive species in a 22-county area in the Ohio River Valley. The premise is, if you can believe it, invasive species aren't great at following property lines or even state lines, so we need to work together. Invasive species are spreading quickly and damaging our native plant populations. It's also leading to decreased biodiversity, poor habitats for wildlife, including the pollinators that help our food supply, and even lowering water quality. So on our website, we offer homeowners educational materials and opportunities, volunteer events located all over the tri-state where you can learn about what's taking over your neck of the woods and how best to remove them. So go check us out.
On there, so I got its own hearing.
So go check us out. We've also been developing an invasive plant removal counter. So if you remove invasive plants from your yard or community,
that would make sense.
And please, everyone, mute yourselves if you are able. But if you remove invasive plants from your yard or community, don't forget to submit your contribution. That's at orvcisma.org there on the screen. Ohio River Foundation also gets a shout out very quickly. Ohio River Foundation is a 23-year-old environmental nonprofit focused on environmental advocacy, habitat restoration, and education within the Cincinnati, Greater Columbus, and Lexington areas. ORF has reached over 50,000 students through our educational programs, and our restoration team restores over 30 acres of land every single year. If you're looking for volunteer events or even interested in becoming a member possibly, visit us at ohioriverfdn.org. So without further ado, it's time that we continue for what everyone's been waiting for. Our guest of honor, Bob Bruner. So Bob is from Purdue University's entomology and Department of Entomology, and has been an entomologist for 13 years. For the past 6, they've worked as part of Purdue Extension, and throughout their career, Bob has studied ecology and host plant preference of many invasive species such as soybean aphid and emerald ash borer, which we should all be familiar with, and using that knowledge to educate people on the impacts of different invaders. So Bob's work focuses on helping students learn more about invasive pests and what they can do to either eradicate or prevent them from damaging property, businesses, or natural areas that we know and love. Bob can often be found traveling throughout the state, offering trainings and presentations on a wide variety of groups. But when not at work, Bob can be found with their partner of 10 years and wandering the woods with their 3 dogs, Bo, Lily, and Tara. And without further ado, Bob, I'm gonna stop sharing and then hand it over to you.
All right, sounds good. See, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to get my screen set up right here. So like they were saying, my name is Bob Bruner, and I'm with the Department of Entomology with Purdue University. I'm the exotic forest pest specialist or educator, depending on what part of our website you go to. That is a mouthful to try to say. So to sum up very basically, I help people deal with a lot of problems involving those invasive species that tend to interface with urban forestry and either residential or environments or where landowners are, or where people are just trying to develop like unique crops, like develop a maple syrup operation or something similar. This means that I get to deal with a lot of things that you probably wish you had never heard of. I tend to tell people I am one of the biggest bearers of bad news, and I love what I do. So today I'm going to be covering the spotted lanternfly and some on the tree of heaven. Now, I'm an entomologist, so I'm going to focus a decent amount on the spotted lanternfly, and I'm going to get started with that as well. Now, a few of you, I believe from what I was seeing on the map of where your CISMA covers, you should be in areas where spotted lanternfly has been identified. So hopefully you're not seeing this particular view yet, but eventually you will be. This is a significant group of spotted lanternfly attacking a grapevine arbor. Unfortunately, that grapevine is dead. It just doesn't know it yet. Spotted lanternfly is extremely damaging to grapes as well as many other plants. They are an interesting species. So when I explain what they look like to people, what I usually compare them to is a cicada. Imagine that you have found a very small cicada with very interesting colors on it. They're related to cicadas as well as aphids, stink bugs, and anything else that uses what's called a rostrum to feed, which is a type of piercing, sucking mouthpart, just like a syringe. And it'll poke it into whatever bit of plant that it's trying to feed from and drain out the sap. Fortunately, this has a lot of negative consequences for the plant. It can introduce bacteria, funguses, and virus, as well as just overall damaging the plant itself. One of the biggest issues that we run into with spotted lanternfly is its host range. So a lot of you here are here today because spotted lanternfly is very heavily connected to tree of heaven, which is its native range host plant, which is why they are so closely connected. But spotted lanternfly can travel between a lot of different plants and expect to be successful. That's a very big problem, especially in the environment that encompasses Indiana, Ohio, and the other portions of the Ohio River Valley, because a lot of the trees and a lot of the plants there are at risk. Now, one of the biggest questions I always get is, where did the spotted lanternfly come from? Like a lot of invasive species, this one is native to Asia. What's really funny is that if you go to areas where spotted lanternfly is endemic and ask about it, most people will have never seen one. They are not a very big problem at all over there. In fact, their population is very small and they're well controlled by the organisms and the environment that it's adapted in. It's only when it has been brought out of that environment, it became a problem. And we believe it arrived on imported stone products. And you could see in that image right there, this is a great example of it. What you're looking at are egg masses of spotted lanternfly. It was first detected in 2014 on those stone products that were imported in, and it's since rapidly spread across a significant area. Normally, I would show maps of its spread throughout the East Coast, but suffice it to say, every portion of Pennsylvania, every county in New Jersey, and significant portions of every other state along the East Coast has identified spotted lanternfly in it. It's so widespread that it even has Saturday Night Live skits dedicated to it. And you can find different pieces of information about how to stomp them when you find them and kill them as soon as you can. So what I'm going to show you now is a really interesting image that I think kind of carries that point home. This is a bit of research that was done a couple of years back that estimates the potential spread area of spotted lanternfly. Everywhere that is green and yellow, you have a low to medium chance of seeing one. Everywhere that is in red has a very high chance of getting an infestation should the insect move in that area. And if you note, Indiana and Ohio, we're right under the gun. We are in the perfect target area for this insect. And right now in Indiana, we have 2 major infestation sites, and we have reason to believe that most likely this insect will spread, if it hasn't spread already, to other places throughout the state. Now, we need to think about also, how does it spread? So I want all of you to think back for just a moment. Remember how I mentioned cicadas earlier. Think back to when we had that big Brood X outbreak a few years ago, when the cicadas finished their very, very long diapause and they all came out of the ground and they were everywhere for a summer. Remember those things flying around? They would just buzz around. They would smack off the side of your house. They might have even bounced off your chest when you walked outside, or they try to hang on to something. Cicadas aren't very good flyers. They're really clumsy. They can go distance, but they're very, very clumsy. Spotted lanternflies are kind of the same way. They can't migrate effectively very well. They are able to. They are flighted insects. They will go places, but they're better off taking advantage of human-based transportation. So what we are concerned about is when we find spotted lanternfly by major points of shipping and industry, or when we have interstate movement. So for example, one of the infestations that we've identified in Indiana and Switzerland County originally started because it's believed someone moved from Pennsylvania, whereas a lot of the other ones that we're finding are connected to railroads. So for example, it has been identified, I believe, in railroad hubs within Cincinnati, which means that I would expect that places in Indiana and further westward might get spotted lanternfly as they travel along with rail cars. And one of the things that I really, really want to emphasize is you may have heard of maybe starting 15 years ago or so, there was a campaign, at least in Indiana and several other surrounding states, of don't move the firewood. You know, if you cut firewood, don't move it out of the county. That was due to the emerald ash borer and the fact that it can exist within that wood and survive for a short time and spread that way. Well, that still remains true. Spotted lanternfly can spread in the same way because the egg masses it lays are attached to things like wood you chop or vehicles, etc. So I would emphasize to all of you now, if you're someone who takes advantage of firewood, if you like camping, or if you use wood stove heating, burn it where you get it as much as you can. Don't move firewood, certainly not out of county areas. I honestly tell people, try to plant it, use it where you cut it, just to cut down on the transmission of insects, because that's how nasty they can be. So what I'm showing you right now is the infestation in Huntington, Indiana. Now, I had the opportunity to go there last week, and I flew a drone over the infestation sites. Each one of those red dots you see is where there is a tree of heaven that is infested by spotted lanternfly. And you can see that's quite a few of them. And right where you see that kind of little cup being formed by the different dots on the screen right next to a railroad, that's where I was flying my drone. And we got to see that a lot of the trees there were showing signs of heavy infestation and the kinds of damages it was developing. And one of the things that I want to emphasize again is that this is right by a rail yard. That little line you see just south of the infestation, where it looks like it's kind of a segmented line, that is a set of rail cars right on the railroad at that moment. And then if we move to our Switzerland infestation, you could see that this one seems to be associated with that kind of county block residential area. You can see the woods there have heavy infestations. Unfortunately, the woods here have a lot of tree of heaven. And when the spotted lanternfly got transmitted here, it spread throughout so many tree of heaven across a broad area. And this is kind of that nightmare situation that we don't want to see. Now, the good thing is that Indiana's Department of Natural Resources is working very, very hard to contain these infestations, and they've done a really good job at it. They've been helping us teach folks, helping people be aware of the dangers of this. So they've been fairly well contained. But there is no force on this earth that is going to prevent that insect from staying in place. It's just not possible. We would have to stop all human traffic from those areas to even have a chance. And that's just not going to happen. So we stay prepared. We know that it's going to move. One of the ways that we do this, we teach people how to identify them. Now, as an entomologist, I love this bug because it is the easiest to identify thing ever. All of them will share the traits that you see here just in this picture, and I'm going to go over them so you know what to look for as you are trying to identify this insect. I do want to emphasize that if you see this bug, please report it. Now, some of you are in Ohio. I'm not sure what their Department of Natural Resources, what their kind of operating procedures are with this one. If you're in Indiana, we have a hotline that you can call, 1-866-NO-EXOTIC, and you can report sightings there. But here's how you begin to identify them. So the adults are going to have these beige wings with black spots that are going to be bisected by a darker area. And that's when the wings are folded. That's what you're going to see. And then when the wings spread, you're going to see this bright flash of red with black and white patches. Very, very good predator deterrent. That bright color is going to tell a predator, I taste bad, or I'm poisonous, don't eat me. You'll also see that the abdomen is striped with yellow. Now, this is when the insect is gravid. This is when the insect has a lot of eggs in its abdomen that is getting ready to lay eggs. Otherwise, that yellow may not be very evident. But all of these colors come from the fact that the tree that the insect eats usually contains a secondary compound that's poisonous or toxic. So the insect will sequester them in its body and use it to create those colors that gives it the nice warning coloration. Now, as for its life cycle is fairly easy to understand. I'll start at the top there with the eggs from September to June. That's how it's going to overwinter in a very, very cryptic egg mass. It's very hard to see. They are going to be stuck to trees, to cars, to houses, everything you can think of. And I'm going to show you how to start identifying them, but I will warn you, it is challenging. Now in April through June, they're going to start hatching out as a very, very tiny first instar, that little black set of insects with white polka dots you see, and they're going to continue to grow throughout the month of July. And now when we get to the point where we're sitting right now, we have insects that are bright red with white polka dots. And this is how we actually discovered this insect was in Indiana the first time. Someone called in or put on a Facebook page, hey, I see some kind of weird mutated lady beetle. And it was actually this bright red nymph, the fourth instar of the spotted lanternfly. And thankfully someone caught it and reported it. And then after the September period of time, they're going to become adults. They're going to mate, lay eggs, and then the adults will probably die off. Unfortunately, the eggs are perhaps the most challenging part of it because they are so cryptic, but I'm going to show you some images to help you better understand what you're looking for. So here's our early and late instar insects. The early instar, the little black one right there, I think they're kind of adorable, but unfortunately they are just kind of nasty. They will be feeding on trees. They're going to typically favor the lower portions or the younger shoots of the trees where it's easier to feed. And you can see these are on Tree of Heaven right now. And then they're going to, well, here, this is the next part. I've got a little ahead of myself. Here are the egg masses that we're going to be looking for. Now, this is a little bit of a challenge. You have to figure out where the egg mass is on the tree. So I will skip the game I usually play with audiences. I usually try to get people to identify where it is and just go ahead and show you. Right there, there are two egg masses right in the dead center, that little bit of cracked mud looking thing right there on the tree. Imagine you saw that on the side of your vehicle. You're not going to look at that and say, oh, that's an egg mass. You're going to think that's some mud that you need to clean off. And half the time, folks won't even think twice about it. Or if we get even worse, this is another Tree of Heaven that is covered with egg masses. There are, I think I counted once, there are about 30 unique egg masses on this Tree of Heaven right here. You could see there's spots where it looks like the egg masses have kind of this texture like a crocodile skin, where they're not quite as covered. Otherwise, they're kind of covered in this secretion the adult creates to protect them from temperature and to protect them from being seen by predators, which makes them look just like a smear of mud and very, very difficult to find. So far in the last year, Indiana's Department of Natural Resources eliminated about 17,000 of these egg masses in an attempt to control this insect. That is a lot, and unfortunately, I doubt they even scratched the surface with trying to get its population down. They can lay a lot of eggs at once, and they're hard to find. So just a little quick bit on their feeding habits so we understand the kind of damage they do. This picture really illustrates it. They have mouth parts shaped like a syringe that they will go ahead and poke into the tissue of the tree or other plant that they're feeding on. So in this case, you see this little nymph that's poked into the trunk right there. Now, the good thing is that they're kind of lazy. So they don't suck liquid out of a tree. They rely on the turgor pressure within the plant to push the liquid into their bodies. And again, I just kind of emphasize on this slide, they have a very broad host range. So why don't we cover that host range just a touch here? So first off, what are they going to eat? What do we care about? Well, first off, I mentioned grapes. They will kill grapes. They will overinfest grapes like you wouldn't believe, and they will destroy grape arbors. A lot of People in the wine industry are very, very concerned about the damage that this insect can do, and we're trying to work with them as best we can. American river birch is another one where they will do significant damage, so they may not necessarily kill the tree. They will definitely make its life very hard, as well as maples. So I live in an area where there's a lot of maple syrup production, and unfortunately there is evidence that spotted lanternfly infestation will ruin the quality of maple syrup that's created out of an infested tree. They will also go for black walnuts, which is a valuable veneer tree within several states. So you can get a lot of decent quality veneer wood out of it. Black walnut's also facing threats from thousand canker as well as spongy moth. So this is a tree that's in a lot of trouble right now. And of course, our favorite, tree of heaven. This is the host plant. This is the plant these insects will feed on in their native range. They will always go to this tree first, but that doesn't mean that they will always stay there. And then the last one are roses. They will actually attack roses. I grow roses on my property, and this kind of kills me because I know eventually we're going to get this. And then we also have at least 100 additional plants that they will attack. I won't list them all here because there are so many, and the results are going to vary. They're not going to be super heavy on all of these plants. Unfortunately, there are just some of them that they will do a significant amount of damage to. So in the case of their movement patterns, so they have a tendency where they're going to hit the same, quote, hot trees every year. What this is the behavior by the adults. They're relying on a tree that they know is successful for their young, and they're going to keep hitting them year after year after year because they know those trees work until eventually, well, the tree will die. Like I said, the nymphs are going to prefer the shoots, whereas the adults are going to prefer the trunks of the trees. This will make it nice so that way they can separate from their feeding areas. Obviously, they'll move the furthest as the adults. They have wings, they'll fly. The nymphs are not going to move very far. They are incapable of flight. They will walk around some, but they kind of more graze than anything else. And then their feeding choices throughout a season are going to vary. And I'm going to show you that just a little bit here before I jump into some information on our tree of heaven. So throughout most of the year, we're going to see them feeding on grape and tree of heaven. That's where they're going to be heaviest. Earlier in the year, they're going to attack roses and then black walnut. And then as we get later on into the summer months, you're going to see them move to river birch, willow, and sumac, and then eventually maple. Now, what this means is that the insects aren't marching from tree to tree. What they're doing is they're filling up a tree as much as they can feasibly get their mouth parts on them. And then when that tree is overpopulated, they're going to move to the next best thing. So they're first going to fill up our grape and our tree of heaven. Well, first they're going to fill up tree of heaven, no matter what. And then after that, depending on the time of the year, they'll go to the next best thing. So early on, they'll fill up tree of heaven and grape and then go to roses. Whereas later on in the summer, when some of those things aren't quite out as much or they're senescing, they'll go ahead and move to maple and sumac, etc. And that's how we're going to see what they'll do. And then just a little bit on the damage here. I've mentioned trees that they can kill. They will reduce the tree's health. They'll reduce its capacity to be prepared for the winter. And then there's one other nasty thing that's really bad. They're indirect damage. These insects produce honeydew, which is a sugary waste. Their bodies can't process all of the sugar that they take in from a tree, all the starch. So they have to excrete it in a substance we call honeydew, which is just basically sugar poop. That will drip down from wherever they're feeding onto all of the understory below. Now, you've seen this before. You've seen aphids do this. If you get a heavy aphid infestation on a plant, you'll see the leaves look slick, they'll become sticky, and you'll see this kind of downy, sooty mold form on it. In a heavy infestation of spotted lanternfly, though, this is going to quite literally rain down from a tree. And you can look up YouTube videos. I believe Penn State Extension put out a few, where you can literally see the honeydew raining out of the tree all over everything underneath it. So I kind of covered that there. All right, so the good thing about spotted lanternfly, they're manageable. They respond to chemicals, they respond to insecticides. There are a lot of systemic insecticides that have been tested on them. Right now, dinotefrin is one that's considered pretty successful. I don't expect you to begin treating it, though. Most likely, your Department of Natural Resources, wherever you are going to start that process. We're not quite at the point where a resident is really going to be focusing on this yet. But I'm going to stop sharing this slide set for the moment, and I'm going to switch over to a little bit on our Tree of Heaven plant. So what I'm going to be sharing with you right now is material that was created by a gentleman named Lenny Farley. He is the Purdue forester. Lenny is very, very good at what he does. He is by far the biggest expert on handling problem trees ever. Let's see. Now, I asked him some time ago if he'd be willing to make a presentation for this, and he was nice enough to go ahead and share that with me. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't get that shared with you. Let's see. Oh goodness, my share screen is fighting with me. I apologize. Give me just a moment here. Okay. Let's see, you folks shouldn't be seeing anything yet, I believe.
And in the meantime, I did drop that phone number and contact information for if you do find one of the spotted lanternflies, or even if you're not quite sure, still take a picture or collect a sample. That'd be very valuable.
And yes, please report. That is the biggest thing that a lot of us who work in this have to deal with, is a lack of reporting. You reporting this is a huge help. So thank you for being patient with me. I apologize. I've got a newborn in the house, so I'm blaming my lack of sleep on that one. So first off, let's identify our Tree of Heaven here. This one has a lot of different names. It can be called stink tree, Chinese sumac, stinking sumac. Sometimes some people aren't actually able to smell Tree of Heaven, but it does. It has a really, really terrible smell if you are able to detect it. It is originally from Asia, and it is the host plant of spotted lanternfly. So they will go to this plant first. It is fairly easy to identify. The leaves are compound, pinnately compound, which means what you're seeing there on that top image, that is not a set of leaves. That is a leaf with multiple leaflets. Now, the leaves themselves are alternately arranged on a branch, and they have what's called an entire leaf margin. Their leaf margins are not serrated, they are entire, they're closed, but they do have glandular teeth at the base of each leaf. So if you look at the bottom image there, those little, what almost looks like serrations or teeth, those are actually kind of glandular bits that are coming out of it. And we've got another image here to show you what's on the underside of those. Those are the glands that are underneath that on the underside of the leaf. If you bruise the plant, if you cut the plant, the smell will be very, very obvious. Some people have described it like rancid peanut butter. My partner, she describes it smelling like skunk. I've had the unfortunate experience of having to remove it from my own property, and it is not fun at all. Other ways you can identify this plant, the bark tends to stand out. It has this funny scaly appearance to it, but you can also find shield-shaped leaf scars on the twigs. And then the pith of the actual shoots is going to be somewhat darkened. And then here's a close-up of some of that scaled bark right here. Now, there are very few trees within any of our tri-state area here that are going to resemble that very closely. There are things that are going to look vaguely similar, but once you see that particular bark pattern, you know that is a Tree of Heaven, guaranteed. So some of the things that can make this tree problematic is that the female trees can produce 10 to hundreds of thousands of seeds. It is just a massive overproducer. Now, some folks have said, well, can you control spotted lanternfly by planting trap trees? You know, plant male trees to attract the spotted lanternfly, but still not have trees that'll reproduce. I think personally that's an invitation to disaster, because I do not trust people enough to understand how to identify the difference between the male and female trees. And it's already a really damaging invasive plant. So I am of the opinion, let's just eliminate all of them, and we will work on eliminating the bug as well. The seeds enclosed in that kind of papery samara that can blow in the wind very easily, so seed spread's very easy. They're mature by September and October, and then they will disperse until the following spring. Now, here's the other big problem with trying to manage Tree of Heaven. This is also why it's so ecologically damaging. If you cut down a Tree of Heaven, it will clonally reproduce from its root system. So that doesn't matter if you keep chopping it down over and over, it's just going to keep growing back. So when you eliminate a tree, you have to fully remove all the root systems. And that is a process that will take years. If you attempt to girdle the tree, if you attempt to do stump treatments, it will continue to do root sprouting responses. So you can start with one individual or a couple of individual and accidentally create hundreds of them. That is kind of the nightmare scenario with an invasive plant. And we've been dealing with that with other plants like stilt grass and other organisms. They can become incredibly dense. So the pictures I showed you of the infestation in Huntington, Indiana, that's where 1 or 2 tree of heaven just started spreading and spreading and spreading and reproducing and having more root sprouts going. And it's outcompeted all the vegetation within that area. All right, so I want to ask real quick, how am I doing on time?
We should probably start wrapping up in a few minutes, but certainly finish whatever you're discussing.
That is just fine. I'm going to go over just a couple of the control recommendations here so that way you know what not to do. And then I will just open it up for questions because I know this is a whole lot to go through. All right, so just a little bit on biological control. There is some good news. We have found a verticillium wilt that will attack tree of heaven. It is still being heavily researched, so it is not out yet, but the signs are hopeful. It appears to only attack tree of heaven and does not harm any other organisms in the environment. Now, a little bit on the chemical control here. There are several that work. Glyphosate, triclopyr, and picloram are effective treatments. You'll know those under names like Darlon or Tordon for treatments, but you want to make sure, and I want to get to this, that you don't attempt a girdle treatment. Don't do that. You're going to cause the root response. You can do a foliar spray. You can do a cup cutting treatment, like what this gentleman right here is doing, where he's cutting a cup into the trunk and he's spraying herbicide into it. But don't attempt to girdle it because you will get the tree to start going through its rooting response. And then let's see here. There are other things you can do too. The mechanical controls are options to help you remove the tree. But again, if you mechanically damage the tree, you're going to get a root response, which is why you have to be very thorough and very careful on how you do this. There are options for foliar applications that will be effective. But again, you're going to be doing this over the course of a few years. All right, so I'm going to stop there. There is a lot that I can go into on this, and I'm happy to share this information after the fact. I just don't want to eat up the rest of the time on it. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I know that was a lot of information very, very quickly.
And if anybody has a question, feel free to unmute yourself or ask it in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Bob, could you go over how you got rid of tree of heaven on your property? Because it looks like too complicated and overwhelming for me to understand. So
the best thing is going to, for me, I live in an area of Indiana that has low density of tree of heaven. Terre Haute and the western side of the state just doesn't have quite the same density. So what I started doing was I was watching my property for sprouts, and I did find a few. So I hand pulled them, and I got to them very, very early. Now it's a lot of work, and you have to keep doing it because you may not get all the root system, but you can make it happen if you hit it early. If you have a larger acreage that you've got a lot of infestation on, that's not going to work out for you. So in that case, what you'll have to do is, if you're not sure that you can do this one, all of our local states here that we're in, they have extension services. Call up your local extension service, talk to them about your problem, and they can help you find someone who can either come out and help you do it, like a CISMA, or they can get a forester or someone similar to help you with it. It is a taproot, I believe. The ones that I pulled were taproot, but those root systems, since they clonally reproduce, they will spread like crazy. So it may not remain just an easy taproot that you can yank on and pull out. It will, if the tree does its root response, it will go crazy.
Is there any hope that municipalities can do anything about trees of heaven along interstates and in publicly owned woods? I mean, it sounds to me like if you've got mature trees, it's not possible to eliminate them.
It's not impossible. It's a lot of work. The biggest thing to encourage your municipality to do it is something like what you're doing right now, being a part of a CISMA. You have the potential political power to be able to encourage your local governments to be able to do this. But I mean, I won't dress it up for you. It's hard to make them do it. It's money and it's a lot of labor. So it's a fight. The biggest thing is just to try to pressure your local politicians to really look at this problem. And the best thing you can do is, try to control on your own property, because this will spread. Let's see, I'm finding someone asking if we have an infestation on our property and it's reported, will ODA or another organization come out and contain the infestation for the homeowner? If you find spotted lanternfly, so if you're in Indiana, Indiana's DNR will come out and they will work with you to try to contain that infestation, because this insect is being very closely watched. Now, I don't know that that will last forever, though, because eventually the infestation will get too large for them to be able to feasibly work with. Think back to how emerald ash borer started working out. The sooner we can work on it, though, the better. And then what is the treatment for a tree with larvae or adults? Spray, cut down, and burn. So normally what we see with larvae is that you can do a foliar application of an insecticide and it will affect them. Will take the population down pretty good. The adults are primarily controlled through the application of a systemic insecticide like dinotefuran that can be applied like a soil drench. The good thing too is that the active times of this insect avoid interacting with pollinators. So we're able to avoid damaging the local insect environment heavily as well. And then I see, is there a control for the egg masses? Horticultural oils like soybean oil will control egg masses. But what we also do, think of like when you organize a weed wrangle. We also organize an egg smushing day where you go out with something like an old credit card and you just scrape the eggs off the tree and smash them. We've had quite a few of those here in Indiana. Is it possible to share a link to the slideshow on Tree of Heaven? I can email one to Jessica. We do have one up on YouTube where it's Lenny giving this, who could talk much more effectively than I can. So I will happily share that because his take on this is just excellent. Can the adults be attracted to pheromone traps? There is some trapping of the adults going on, but that is purely for monitoring purposes. You will not get control via a pheromone trap. In fact, you could accidentally create a situation like the Japanese beetles. You can do monitoring. Let's see, sorry if I missed it, but saplings and young trees can be pulled. Yes, you can pull saplings and young trees. You've got to be thorough though. When I pulled them on my property, they were very small saplings because I've been watching my property like a hawk. I don't have a whole lot of land here. I kind of live on a postage stamp. If you have a young tree, that's going to be harder because the tree, it'll be more established and they are a challenge to pull. They will grow into buildings and damage foundations. So the earlier you can get to it, the better. And if you're talking about a young tree, you're probably going to need some kind of mechanical help.
And from my understanding, they grow just so quickly. You turn around and they're, 5 feet tall. So persistence is key.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you will have to accept that if you're fighting Tree of Heaven, this is a multi-year project and there's no way to say it nicely. It'll suck. Let's see, have lanternflies been found on honeysuckle, one of our most ubiquitous invaders? Not that I am aware of yet, but I think that's more of we just haven't happened to find them yet. I think that they'll probably attack it, but we need to see evidence of it. That's just me speculating. Right now, we don't have evidence that they're going to help provide control for invasive plants. They don't do enough damage. Only a few species really get hammered down by them. But again, that's speculation. We're going to see what it looks like as time goes on.
And Bob, are you familiar with standards for, truck checking or for railroad lines? Are they being told to look for these bugs or masses or anything to reduce spread?
Well, they're being told, yes. We are DNR and a lot of different states who have different quarantines going on have asked all transportation to please try to manage as best they can. It's just these are private companies, so they're going to do what they're going to do. And honestly, even if they did the best job they could, it'll be very, very hard to try to prevent that, because if you're talking about a train with some 25 cars attached to it, and you're checking every single one of them for an egg mass that's no bigger than a silver dollar that looks like mud, that's kind of a tall order. Let's see, I see someone asking, is lanternfly expansion being helped by global warming? Will a long freeze kill the eggs? So that same mud coating, that same secretion the adult puts on them protects them from insecticide and colder temperatures. So a long freeze could kill them if it's long enough and cold enough, but these insects are really good at resisting temperature. Now, I can't imagine that the effects of climate change aren't helping these insects. Right now, we're experiencing warmer summers that are longer. That will encourage all insects to develop more quickly and to spread. Now, climate change, though, is not just guaranteed you're going to get warmer every year. It's going to guarantee that we are going to experience things we've never experienced before. It could entirely be possible that we're colder next year. There's no way to know. I would err on the side of caution and just assume that, yes, most likely it is going to improve their chances of spreading. That's not guaranteed. See, if you have a limited number of tree of heaven in the woods, is the best defense against SLF to cut down and eliminate the tree of heaven before the SLF finds them? I think so. Yeah. The tree of heaven is, if I were to put balance the scales between spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven, they're almost equal, but tree of heaven is so capable of just taking over an ecosystem. To me, you want to act on that as soon as you find it. Because if you can eliminate the host plant, you are going to severely reduce the chance the insect will be interested in the area, because that's its host plant. That's what it wants most of all. Now, again, though, it can go to a lot of different kinds of trees, and it can be successful on them. So it doesn't guarantee that you won't get them, but I can't imagine it not helping you. You guys have so many great questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any more. And I think you have I'll stop sharing because I think you said you had a few more slides you wanted to put up.
Yeah. John, for your question regarding pamphlets, I will try to find some resources for you, and then we'll put those in the follow-up email. Okay. Okay. Just to conclude, thank you to all that were able to hang out with us today. Thank you to Bob for your expertise, your time, and thanks to Purdue for allowing us to steal you for a few hours, or an hour, I guess. If anyone has questions at a later time, I do have Bob's contact information along with Ohio River Foundation and CISMA. If you're interested in more events like this, consider signing up for the Ohio River Foundation e-newsletters. That's through our website listed there, or follow us on socials. Bethany, did you have something that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, so changing the subject a little bit, just plug here at the end. Ohio River Foundation, as many of you might know, we host the Cincinnati Coffee Festival. And we just wanted to remind everyone that that will be happening October 21st and 22nd of this year. And tickets are now on sale, so they can go to the Ohio River Foundation website or the Cincinnati Coffee Festival website to get those tickets if you are interested in attending this year's coffee festival. And of course, that came about because you can't have great coffee without great water. So a great way to get our message out there. And we hope you all will consider attending if you can.
Awesome. Okay, so one last thank you, everyone. Thanks again, and have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you soon.
Thank you all.